there any constituency statements by honourable members? I call the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The cost of living affects us all, but for Australia's young people it's different. Affected by uncertainty, inequality and instability, they have their whole lives ahead of them, yet they have no sense of what their quality of life will be. Last week I hosted an event with members of Goldstein's Gen Zoe youth movement at the Bricks Bar in Brighton. It was a great turnout of some of the most passionate young people in my electorate, ranging from Year 12 students to university students, fresh graduates to young adults in the workforce. We had hospo workers, tradies, a few parents and some old faces from my 2022 campaign. The event was an opportunity for Gen Z and millennials to raise their voice on what's most important to them, but most of all for me to listen to their uncertainty, their fears, to their anger, but also to hear their hope. This is Gen Zoe, the passion of our young generations to speak up and chase the future they deserve, and that as leaders in this place we must help provide. They make us listen. They do politics differently. Members of this movement who came along were asked what they want to see done differently and what their key concerns are. In Canberra, better be ready to hear it. Cost of living, intergenerational equity, interest rates, tax reform, housing shortages, renter rights, minimum wages for hospo, and Zoe is brat. I'll take it. You've probably picked up the obvious theme here, and it's not Charlie XCX's new album. It's the reality that for Australia's young generation, the future is uncertain, and they believe the government isn't doing enough to fix it. Gen Z and millennials are struggling with a soaring list of financial pressures. The cost of living is climbing, and many young people are struggling to cover their basic living expenses. For most, the idea of getting a mortgage, for example, isn't even on the radar. Whether it's the price of a Mikey fare, the prohibitive cost of entertainment, or outrageous supermarket grocery bills, every expense adds to the burden. Soaring cost of living pressures have deeper social consequences. Queues to inspect just one rental property on a weekend, living at home with your parents for longer, less people out on a Saturday night, and huge challenges to access mental health support if needed. To cope, millennials and Gen Z are forgoing the experiences which eventually turn into core memories that are vital to growing up. I'm determined to bring the voices of the Goldstein Gen Zoe group to Canberra. The system as it stands is failing them. I'm listening and I'm fighting for the future they deserve. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. The member for Aston.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The winter break has provided me with so many great opportunities to get out and about in my electorate and meet and connect with so many different constituents. In July, late July, I had the great pleasure of meeting with the very first member for Aston, John Saunderson, his wife Colleen and his daughter Liz. And it was great being able to hear from John about very many different experiences he had doing this fantastic job, which he did from 1984 to 1990. John told me what it was like being a part of the Hawke Labor government, and I was certainly a very captive audience, I must say. I thank John very much for his time and the time of his family as well, and the sound advice that he shared with me. Additionally, during the break, I had the great privilege to attend some fantastic celebrations at one of which, Kings Park in Upper Ferntree Gully, in celebration of National Swiss Day, along with the wonderful state member for Mombolg, Daniela Di Martino. The day was organised by the Swiss Yodel Choir Matterhorn, with many terrific cultural celebrations to experience and join in with. I didn't do the yodeling so much though. It was such a terrific turnout with over 500 people all celebrating and supporting the event with yummy food too, I must say. It was an honour to meet with the Honorary Consul of Switzerland in Melbourne, Manuela Erb, and members of the committee. I'm certainly looking forward to National Swiss Day next year. I've also had many opportunities to hold mobile offices across the electorate, giving me an opportunity to chat with many constituents. And these provide a fantastic opportunity to get out into the community and have great chats with people about life and any problems they may have as well. I visited Wellington Village in Rowville and my friends at Choco Bean Coffee Shop, which always give me a great chance to chat with the locals. I also joined many early risers at Boronia and Bayswater train stations and was thrilled to bump into some very familiar faces as well. I ran into Steve, who I've met several times over the last couple of years now, and as well as Brian, who's originally from Ohio. He told me about, I first met him last year, and him and his wife Perla, they'd just become Australian citizens just before the by-election actually, and they voted for me, so I was very happy to meet them both again. The support I received from so many lovely locals who stopped to say hello and pass on their feedback is much appreciated, and a big thanks to those who let me know they voted for me 2 times, so thanks for that. I encourage all those in my electorate of Aston to pop down to Wellington Village or any of the mobile offices to have a chat about anything or for any federal government related assistance, so thank you.
Thank you. The member for Parkes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. A short while ago, early in the winter, Wee Waa lost one of its most loved and respected citizens. Frank Hadley, a cotton pioneer, passed away at Wee Waa at the age of 97. Now, Frank was a pioneer in the true sense of the word. Frank and his good friend and neighbour in California, Paul Carl, migrated to Australia in the early 60s, and straight away they saw the potential to grow cotton in the Nemoy Valley. It wasn't considered really an option by others at the time, but with the completion of Keeper Dam, the regulation of the Nemoy River, they saw that opportunity. They pooled their resources with basically a handshake agreement that they would work together until they were established, then they would split their farms and go their separate way. That they did. And after a couple of years, Frank and Paul went their own separate ways, but remained lifelong friends and farmed side by side until Paul's passing a few years back. The early challenges that they had in growing cotton, it was essentially a sheep farm, were enormous. I remember Frank telling me that they battled castor oil plants, variegated thistles and the like. The first crop that they grew, I think they had to take to Brisbane to be ginned. And so it wasn't long after they started growing the crop that Frank was instrumental in forming the Nemoy Cotton Cooperative so they could gin their cotton locally. Not long after that, he was an early director of cotton seed distributors so they could take control of the cotton seed and also develop varieties that were suitable to the Australian climate. I had the privilege of having a few chats to Frank over the years, and he was a true gentleman, a softly spoken man, a wonderful contributor to the community of Wee Waa, a volunteer in various organisations, and an inspiration to everyone. He never quite lost his Californian twang, but in that polite sort of Californian way, he gave the impression to everyone he spoke to that he was really pleased to see them. Just recently, before his death, Paul Carl's grandson Sam took him for a drive on a modern cotton picker, and he was incredibly proud of the progress that this industry has made, from the early starts by Paul Carl and Frank Hadley to being one of the most, if not the most efficient cotton industry in the world. They now produce more cotton per net megalitre of water and litre of diesel than anywhere else in the world, and that is all because of the pioneering work of a wonderful man by the name of Frank Hadley. Rest in peace.
Thank you. The member for Lyons.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Volunteers are the beating heart of our communities. Whether it's community outreach, environmental causes or education, there is a place where a volunteer's unique skills and interests can flourish for the betterment of the community. It's a rewarding experience, and I'd like to use these few minutes to mention some of the wonderful volunteers in my electorate. First and foremost, I'd like to pay my respects to Barbara Morley, who I was very saddened to hear that died last week. Barbara's dedication over many decades to the Magra Country Women's Association and to the community will be greatly missed. My staff and I will particularly miss receiving her handwritten invitations on the lovely floral stationery that she always used, and the annual Magra CWA AGM will still, of course, have incredible spreads to enjoy, but with one less treat at the table. Joe Saunderson of the Perth Progress Association hosts a monthly scone time at her house as an opportunity for the community to get together and socialise with her wonderful homemade scones. Joe also arranged last month's inaugural Christmas in July event in Perth, in Tasmania, that I had the pleasure to visit and donate to. There was face painting for kids, live music, lovely bonfire, a Santa and elf run, and lots of trivia. Great day out for the family, despite the wild and woolly weather. And I'd like to thank Jo for her amazing achievement in organising this event. Sonia Williams has been running Under One Rainbow for more than 10 years. Under One Rainbow was originally established following a homophobic, violent act on a young boy in the Bridgewater area. It promotes inclusion and diversity for the LGBTIQA and broader community. And Sonia does amazing work, and she's often at community events with her team. Christian Horvath and the team at Sorrel Community Network are a relatively new volunteer group that provide free food, free pet food and hot meals to the Sorrel community and its environs, and they're doing wonderful work down there in the southeast. And Anne-Marie Blunt is a powerhouse of a volunteer in the St Helens area of my electorate, which is the northeast of the state. Anne-Marie is the founder, and she also played an integral part in the establishment of the St Helens Netball Association. Anne-Marie is a foster carer for children within her own home, a key member in establishing Little Athletics in the St Helens area, and a driver for Meals on Wheels, and she mentors our young people at the St Helens District High School. And just lastly, I'd like to mention Neville Goss of Cressy, who recently retired after an impressive 50 years of employment with Brown's Supermarkets. We all wish Neville well with his retirement. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The member for Fadden.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Like many Australians, I've been closely following an outstanding performance by athletes at the Paris Olympic Games. And among them were four of my constituents: Olivia Gadecki, Kaylee McEwen, Corey Wire and Emma McKeon. Their performances have been truly remarkable and one that they should be extremely proud of. Special shout out to Emma McKeon, who not only won 3 medals this Olympics, but became Australia's most decorated Olympian with 14 career Olympic medals. And that really is something for our community to be very proud of. Later this month, Maddie McTurnan will also represent Australia at the Paralympics for swimming. And I was lucky enough to meet with Maddie at the Arundel Park Riding for the Disabled recently, where she was making a contribution, giving back to other people with disabilities. And I wish her the best of luck for her events at the Paralympic Games. Deputy Speaker, I recently had the pleasure of joining the Labrador Men's Shed for their annual general meeting. This group has played a crucial role in promoting health and mental well-being of their members while greatly contributing to the community. This is mateship while making stuff. Special mention to Len Thompson for his 14 years as Secretary and Merv Holliday for his 7 years of service as President. Best wishes to Gordon Cowser and the new executive. I am confident that you will continue the Men's Shed mission with great success in the years to come. Deputy Speaker, I recently attended the Queensland Country Women's Association Coomera Branch's annual general meeting. This group exemplifies our Australian values and has significantly contributed to our community over many decades in the local area. It was inspiring to hear the way these ladies' skills and collective effort have served our community over the past 12 months, and I look forward to seeing what they can achieve in the year ahead. Deputy Speaker, last month I had the pleasure of joining the Pimpamar Probus Club to celebrate their 4th birthday at their Christmas in July event. The club's rapid growth, now boasting over 100 members, reflects not only the vibrant community spirit in Pimpamar, but also rapid growth in the area in the north of our city. Special thank you to Club President Anne and the committee for inviting me to share this special occasion. And Deputy Speaker, another recent highlight was my trip to Labrador State School, where I attended the academic parade. I was able to recognise high achievers by presenting students with awards, and boy were there some great achievements recognised that day. It was fantastic to spend time with Principal Stephen Josie, to hear about the exciting new developments taking place on their campus, including the completion of their very own Central Park, which I know will play an important role in the school campus for years to come. So well done to the Labrador State School team. Outstanding efforts by the students and a wonderful school that they should all be very proud of.
Thank you. The member for Swan.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. If you ever find yourself in Perth, there's a good chance that you'll end up in the electorate of Swan. Yes, the airport is in the electorate, but it's also a hub of activity. Just across the river from the Perth CBD is Swan. We are stretched between the Swan and the Canning rivers. There are a bunch of diverse suburbs from South Perth to Vic Park to Belmont and High Wycombe, and there's many more. Plus, it's home to Curtin University and the industrial hubs of Welshpool. And thanks to the Albanese Labor government, Swan's about to get a whole bunch more activity through energy efficiency grants. Energy efficiency is all about using less energy to get the same job done, saving money on bills and cutting down on pollution. Right now, there are many products, homes and buildings that waste a lot of energy than what they need to, but Labor is stepping up to change that. I often think that if people could actually see energy waste in real time, that they would actively do actions to try and reduce that. And so what we're doing is we're not just cutting down on greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants, but we're also helping people lower their energy bills. And this is through Labor's Energy Efficiency Grant Program. And I'm pleased to announce that 15 organisations in Swan have received grants to boost their energy efficiency. In Swan, there will be 15 organisations which will total $370,000 in grants, which will aim at making businesses more energy efficient. I recently had the pleasure of visiting one of these businesses with the newly appointed Minister for Climate Change and Energy, the member for Fremantle, and this was his very first visit as a minister. So we got to go and visit Honey Fresh Australia in Bentley. This is an innovative company which is looking at the role of honey in natural medicines, and they're looking at their role in the Australian market, but they also have amazing products which they are exporting overseas. Honey Fresh Australia is receiving $25,000 of a grant to convert their warming room to a solar-generated heating for heat treating their honey. It's a fantastic initiative. Honey Fresh is an amazing family-run business right in Swan, producing active forest fresh honey from the pristine forests of Western Australia. It's from a family with 4 generations of beekeeping. And this included new mum Samantha, and I also learnt that 90% of their honey is exported to Asia and the Middle East. There are other local businesses that have benefited from this grant. Barking Butler, a dog grooming service in Como, Westindo in Rivervale, and Phoenix Steel Sales in Welshpool, and Force Technology in Belmont.
Thank you. The member for Bradfield.
I'm pleased to rise to speak about 2 very important community organisations in my electorate. The first is Street Work, which recently held a supporters breakfast at Willoughby Uniting Church on 29 June, a very well-attended event reflecting the commitment within our community on the North Shore to supporting our young people. And indeed, I look forward to representing the community of Willoughby as it's included amongst the communities that will come into Bradfield once the final redistribution results are announced. Now, Street Work is a not-for-profit organisation helping troubled teens across the North Shore. Their important work includes a Kickstart mentoring program, which seeks to transform the lives and behaviours of vulnerable young people through positive role models and influences. An important aspect of this program is putting the young person in close collaboration with a youth case worker. The theme for the breakfast event was the way that Street Work engages with young people in assisting them to build positive relationships, particularly as they may engage in moments of crisis with the police or with juvenile justice. And of course, this building of trust can be complex. It's not necessarily easily achieved, but Street Work does have quite an impressive track record in helping build those ties. There's a constructive discussion of the way that early intervention can assist in preventing antisocial behaviour. And I want to acknowledge the Chief Executive of Street Work, Helen Banu, OAM and her team for their important work, and of course the many supporters of street work. The second community cause I want to speak about is the Special Olympics Ku-ring-gai Chase Fun Run and the Barry Easy Walk, which took place on the 16th of June in Wahroonga. Special Olympics plays an important role in our northern suburbs by offering people with intellectual disabilities the chance to participate in sporting activities. It's grown significantly since it first began in Australia in 1976. Well, I was delighted to join hundreds of locals to participate in this fun run and walk, which winds through the leafy but troublingly hilly streets of Wahroonga. I chose to participate in the 10-kilometre run, and I want to particularly acknowledge local medical specialist Dr Rod Brooks, because he passed me and I passed him a couple of times, and with a bit of a push, we both produced some of our best times, finishing in just under 53 minutes. Can I acknowledge the vision and tireless work of the late Barry Easy OAM, who founded the Ku-ring-gai Chase Fun Run and Walk. This has become an important community organisation on the Upper North Shore, and I pay tribute to the many volunteers who make this successful event possible, as well as the Sydney Upper North Division of Special Olympics Australia. I thank them all for their contribution, and I congratulate everybody who ran, walked or otherwise participated in this important community event.
Thank you. The member for Brand.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Chair. The Albanese Government understands the transformative power of education. We want to make sure that all students, whether they are at primary school or high school or TAFE at university, have every chance of success. In my electorate of Brand, the Albanese Labor Government is making significant investments to support our local schools and school communities. I grew up and went to school in Safety Bay and Rockingham Beach, and so I know how important it is that local students get the best opportunities for a great education. Thanks to Labor, schools in Brand are now better equipped with the technology and infrastructure they need to deliver a quality education for students. Through the Commonwealth's Capital Grants program, a total of $7.8 million worth of projects have been completed for new facilities in local schools in Brand. Schools such as the beautiful Mother Teresa Catholic College in Baldivis, the King's College in Wellard and Rockingham Montessori School have all benefited from this program. These new facilities include libraries, science labs, outdoor sports areas, food studios, an arts centre and specialist support rooms, and they will help generations of school students to come. And recognising the role of parents and communities in the education of young people, the Albanese Government has so far provided more than $12,000 to P&Cs in Brand through our volunteer grants program. And after school years, we want to make sure that students succeed well into the future. Access to quality vocational and higher education are essential to making sure that students are properly equipped with the skills for the jobs they want and that the country needs them to do. Thanks to the Albanese Government, students will be able to access courses for high-demand jobs fee for free as we deliver 300,000 fee-free TAFE places from this year. These enormous fee-free TAFE places will change lives, especially in the electorate of Brand, and it will address skill shortages across a range of industries. And that's especially the case in the suburbs of Rockingham and Kwinana, where the local community has the exciting opportunity to work in close support of the advanced technology of the AUKUS program being conducted at HMAS Stirling. We were also introducing as a government payments for those doing mandatory practical placements next year. That means those studying really important teaching, nursing, midwifery and social work courses can apply for payments of $320 a week while undertaking that mandatory placement. These payments will help students in Brand complete their courses and ultimately help employers get the skilled staff they need, which of course will be a benefit for the whole community. And on top of this, more than 16,000 people in Brand will receive student debt relief thanks to this Albanese Labor Government. I'm really proud of the work this government is doing to support young people and their education. These initiatives will help local students in our community to realise their full potential and to succeed.
Thank you. The member for Banks.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, on the 3rd of August, I attended the centenary dinner of St George Football Association. What an incredible organisation St George Football Association is, and it's existed in various forms for 100 years, Deputy Speaker. And it was great to see the president of football St George, its chair Irene Hatzipetros, the Chief Executive, Phil Brown, and all of the very many clubs represented on the night. Clubs like Lugano, like Forest Rangers, like Oatley FC, like All Saints Oatley West, like Penshurst West, and so many others. And it was a terrific night. Football is the absolute lifeblood of our community. There are some 14,000 members of the St George Football Association, and it was wonderful to celebrate the centenary, and congratulations to all who are involved in a fantastic night. Deputy Speaker, just this last Friday, the 9th of August, I attended the 60th anniversary celebrations of Georges River College Peakhurst, formerly known as Peakhurst High. The students put on a wonderful display celebrating the 60 years of this fantastic organisation. We learned so much about the school, some of its luminaries who have attended the school in the past, including Robin Denham, the chairperson of Tesla. We learned attended Georges River College Peakhurst, along with many other people who have gone on to great success in our community. To the principal, Diane Wilson, and to all the students who are involved in putting on such a professional and uplifting event, thank you and congratulations. Deputy Speaker, Akana College is a terrific school in our area. On the 25th of July, it was great to join the principal, Osmond Carolia, and the students for a demonstration of what they are doing in robotics. The Year 5 and 6 kids have entered the Universal Robotics Challenge, and they will be representing Australia this year in the World Robotics Finals in Japan. They did a demonstration of the robot, which was incredibly impressive, and the kids who were there on the day are a great credit to their school and to their families. They spoke in a very articulate way about the tremendous work they're doing in the Robotics Challenge. Congratulations to all the teachers and to Principal Carolia as well. Deputy Speaker, on the 27th of July, the Pinnacle had its grand opening, formerly known as South Hurstville RSL. It's been through an extensive renovation in recent years, and it was terrific to see the CEO, Simon Mickelson, of course, President Patrick Weddy, who worked so hard for our local community. There was a huge crowd there on the day, and it's been a tremendously successful renovation, and no doubt the Pinnacle is going to become even more of a meeting place in our community than it already was in the past. Thank you to Simon and to Patrick and to everyone at the Pinnacle on this very successful project.
Thank you. The member for Bruce.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Early childhood education is vital. It's good for the economy, it's good for families, and it's amazing for our youngest Australians. If we want to invest in our human capital and be a wealthier, smarter country 20, 30 years from now, it's one of the smartest investments that we can make, which is why the government's commitment to a 15% wage rise for early childhood educators, contingent on centres not increasing their fees by more than 4% over 12 months, is so welcome. It's good, sensible Labor policy, good for workers and good for families. Now, you'd expect the opposition, the alternative government in the country, to support it. But once again, they're full of negativity and blatant lies. Liberal Senator Gerard Rennick, August the 9th, in his own words on X, formerly known as Twitter, I'll quote, "Institutionalised childcare is a sacred cow for the Labor Party. It helps fulfil a number of their goals. 1, destroy the family unit. 2, brainwash children early with the woke mind virus." To suggest that by lifting wages for hard-working early childhood educators, the government is seeking to destroy the family unit is frankly just alt-right lunacy. But it's also profoundly insulting to every Australian mum and dad and carer, sometimes grandparents and others who have care for kids, who parent kids, to choose to access childcare for their children, whether to balance work and family responsibilities, or people even not in the workforce at that time who want to access early childhood education and invest in their kids. But this is the same guy, this Liberal senator, who Peter Dutton recently said, and I'll quote again, "Senator Rennick has demonstrated he's not afraid to take up the fight in order to defend the values of the LNP, and I ask you to support Gerard as part of my team." It's not the first time we've seen these attitudes, though, Deputy Speaker. Remember, they were infighting in their own party room over childcare subsidies when they were in government. One of the LNP Good Old Blokes Club even went so far as suggesting publicly that working women were outsourcing parenting. That led to weeks of infighting in the coalition party room, and it's never been clear just how many of them support that view and support Senator Rennick. It is crystal clear, though, that the Liberals do not support wage increases for workers. And it's no surprise. When they were in government, their official economic policy was to, I quote, their then Finance Minister said, low wages were a deliberate design feature of our economic architecture. Well, I'll give them that. That's one thing they did achieve in their wasted decade of decay and dysfunction. Real wages went backwards. For people in my electorate, God knows how many childcare workers. I meet them when I door knock, I see them at the childcare centres, and all the parents who rely on quality early childhood education, this is incredibly welcome.
Thank you. In accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statements has concluded, and I call the clerk.
Government business. Next order of the day, Telecommunications Amendment SMS Sender ID Register Bill 2024, resumption of debate on second reading.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Moreton.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I particularly thank the member for Hinkler for coming along to hear this speech. I know he just can't get enough of me as the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Public Works Committee. No, so seriously, Deputy Speaker, I rise in support of the Telecommunications Amendment SMS Sender ID Register Bill as brought to the House by the Honourable Minister for Communications. This bill is an important part of Labor's multifaceted approach to combating SMS scams and protecting Australian consumers. Like the member for Astley, not Astley. Aston, sorry. As the member for Aston knows, this legislation is welcomed by all constituents around Australia, but by Moreton constituents who have contacted my office to share their terrible experience with SMS scams. And I'm sure that the member for Aston has had people in her electorate concerned about this, distressed. They need their phones for all sorts of health reasons and the like, but then they're getting scams. SMS scams are a scourge and they're not going away. In 2023, Australians reported 37% more scams via text message compared to the previous year. Unfortunately, it can be pretty easy to fall for a text scam. Your phone pings, you glance at it and recognise the name of your bank, or a toll charging service that you do use, or a government agency or a courier used to deliver online purchases. So you're not to know that these are fake text messages that are sent using sender identification in the message headers. If you click on the link in the text, you'll then be deceived into responding or taking the actions the message suggests. If worse comes to worse, you may end up losing your personal information or your money. So I stress, don't click on the hyperlink. It might seem like a simple scam, but the criminals and the technology behind it are actually very sophisticated. Sometimes scam messages can appear in the same message chain as real messages from the organisation that you're actually dealing with. This makes them even harder to spot. Scammers also prey on our fears. The scam messages often contain threats to cease a service or to charge a fine if you don't act immediately. Or worse, they may falsely claim that you or your accounts have been hacked, or that you have a substantial bill that needs urgent payment, or that there is a problem with your package delivery. It's not just a Nigerian prince offering you a great marriage or deal. We're all told never click on a link in an SMS if you don't know the sender. We all need to remember this, but in our busy lives, when you recognise the sender and you know you have a parcel due for delivery, it's all too easy to click on the link. It doesn't occur to you that it's not really Star Trek couriers or Australia Post who have messaged you. So this bill takes action against the insidious practice of SMS scamming. The measures it contains take the scammers on by making it harder for them to operate. The crux of the bill is the establishment and maintenance of a register of legitimate sender IDs by the Australian Communications and Media Authority, known as ACMA. This builds on the rules registered by ACMA in 2022, which have blocked more than, wait for it, 533 million scam texts from July 22 to March 24. It also builds on the information gathered via the pilot register, which was launched in December last year. The pilot program included organisations such as the Commonwealth Bank, the National Australia Bank, Services Australia and the ATO. The bill allows for the register to be either voluntary or mandatory, enabling the decision on its status to be implemented by the end of the year. It also dictates that the register can be maintained either partially or wholly by a contracted third party. The bill will also put in place an industry standard for telecommunications providers who manage SMS traffic. These providers will be required to check texts with sender IDs to ensure they are on the register. Those which are not may be blocked or the text message tagged with a warning or labelled as fraudulent. There is some set-up work to do. ACMA will have the power to make determinations by legislative instrument. These will outline the requirements for access to the register as well as setting out some admin and operation guidelines. All of these will be in place before the register commences. Deputy Speaker, the successful rollout of the register is also dependent on the deployment of a sophisticated IT system which has strong privacy and security features. It will also need to interact securely with the systems and processes used by the telecommunications industry. The legislation will commence once the decision over voluntary or mandatory permission is made by the government. And the bill accepts that ACMA needs time to establish the register to take IT requirements into account. The current timeline for rollout is late next year and will most probably be after a transition and testing period. The register will benefit Australian consumers by decreasing the number and frequency of SMS scams. It will also protect legitimate brands and restore confidence and trust in SMS communications. Importantly, it will disrupt the business model of scammers and make Australia one of the biggest economies on earth, the 13th biggest economy, will make us a less attractive target for their dodgy operations. We know that would-be scammers will attempt to find other ways to target Australians once the register is operational. That's the nature of being a wealthy country. The bill therefore allows for the Minister of Communications to respond to evolving scam attempts in the future. The Minister will be able to make determinations regarding future new communication services which might use sender IDs. It also enables the Minister to use an identifier other than letters, numbers or symbols in the future and allows for the extension of the register to retain additional relevant information. Since coming to government, Labor has taken incisive and comprehensive action against scamming. We established the National Anti-Scam Centre as part of the ACCC. The NASC provides several services, including the Scam Watch service, to share up-to-the-minute information on scams and the best way for Australians to protect themselves. It also collects and shares information across government and business sectors and coordinates action to combat scammers. I recommend checking out the Scam Watch website and sharing it amongst your constituents or friends or neighbours or elderly parents. It provides valuable tips on how to spot a scam text and the steps to take if you're clicked on a link in a message. It's something that my community has particularly appreciated when I brought the Minister, Stephen Jones, up to talk about scams. It gave people information and confidence to then talk to their friends about it. The Albanese government has done more than that. Obviously, we've directed $67.5 million over 4 years to bolster the Fighting Scams initiative to protect Australians from financial harm. The funding enables the establishment of a scams code framework. This focuses on mandatory industry codes for banks, for digital communications platforms and telecommunications providers in regard to preventing, detecting and stopping scams. The code requires all telecommunications providers to identify, trace and block SMS scams. It will also support ACMA to enforce compliance with providers. Of course, this funding is in addition to the nearly $87 million over 4 years announced in last year's budget. We are committed to taking on the scammers and slowly but surely we are winning. This bill is backed by 2 rounds of extensive consultation with the public and with stakeholders. ACMA commenced targeted consultation in February last year with the telecommunications providers, with government agencies, with merchants and consumer organisations to establish the level of support for a proposed register. The second phase of consultation was held in February and March this year and focused on how the Australian register should operate, that is, whether it should be mandatory or voluntary. We anticipate that ACMA will hold further consultations to decide the final operational details before implementation, whatever will be most efficient. Deputy Speaker, the establishment of the register and the other measures reflects the Albanese Labor government's actions to protect Australian consumers. Or as the Minister for Communications said, Cracking down on criminals trying to rip off hard-working Australians is a priority for this government. Great words, and I commend her work, and I commend this bill to the House.
Thank you. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for New England.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think it's just carrying on where the member for Moreton left off. It's incredibly important that we understand that those who are most likely to have to deal with scammers are the vulnerable, are those who, the elderly, are those who are basically uninitiated, trying to convince people, do not open that link, do not open that link, do not let that cookie onto your phone. Do you know that person has not sent you out a fine for not paying a toll? This is a scam. And people, generally decent people, believe that everything they get is bona fide. And so they have a propensity, the vulnerable, to get caught up in these scams. And a lot of what we find is just like a thief. When a thief breaks into a house, they usually come back because they know they can do it. And that is the problem. When scammers realise that there's a vulnerability of a person, they open themselves up to further scams because the analytics that sit behind the software obviously says, well, this person is actually going further, spending more time looking at it. They're looking at the message for longer, therefore they have a propensity to be vulnerable. In regional areas, we have first of all, sometimes we get things that are quite hilarious. Scams saying, and one that's a bit interesting, I'm in Danglumar. Danglumar is in the middle of nowhere. There is no one around me except wild boys that I grew up with off the grid. And it says that there is some wonderful, delightful human female who wants to meet me and she's only a kilometre away. And so I stand on the hill and go, I wonder which tree she's living in. But, you know, I suppose if that was in a city context, someone might be vulnerable enough to think, oh, well, you know, I'm lonely, this is a chance for me to meet another person. Obviously, it's a scam. Or the other one that happens out in regional, I haven't paid my tolls. Well, to whom? To whom have I not paid my tolls? But if I was living in Sydney, that would be like something I'd very likely consider that is an issue. What I also is incredibly important, it shows our reliance on telecommunications and how not only the good people rely on telecommunications, but us. And there's one thing worse than a scam is it not having any telecommunication service whatsoever. In our area, there's been a large difference, and probably the capacity of scammers to contact people has been increased because of the increase of mobile phone towers. And I just want to sort of run through the sort of mobile phone towers that are in our areas, and you'll get a sense of how in the New England this has increased the propensity for people to be contacted by scammers 24/7. We have new mobile phone towers at Ballala, Bonshaw, Drake, Dungowan, Hillgrove, Kings Plains, Rocky Creek, Urbanville, Walker Road, that's near me, Wooloman, Atunga, Barraba, Bruxner Highway at Sandy Hills, Bruxner Highway at Tabulum, Durai, Elsmore, Fossicers Way between Barraba and Manila, Hallsville and Victoria, west of Armidale, Manila, Moonbee, Mount Carrington, Oxley Vale, Pyalamore, Spring Mountain Road, which is White Rock Mountain Road, west of Glenannis, Tamworth, the Worrell side of Tamworth, Walker, the town itself, Westdale, Bordersley, which is near Gyra, Correala, Pinkett, Mount Horrigan, Doughboy Mountain, where we just stopped the swindle factories. I'm really happy about that. Fig Tree Hill, which is near Copeton Dam itself, Kingstown, Moonan Flat, which is down near Elston, Legume, Torrington, Wellinggrove, Weabonga, which is not what people do. It's a village just over the hill from me. Spring Ridge, Blackville, Gilgai, Bucalla, Glen Elgin, Mole River Exchange, Tannerfield, Watson's Creek, and Woods Reef Exchange. We have always tried to make sure that we continue to make sure that people have access to mobile phone technology, and in so doing, people are 24/7 scammers have access to them. Fully support this, and I think it's really important that what it shows is that we have the ability to go to people who provide telecommunications and to put some further licensing agreements and conditions on it. I think in the future we have to look at social media and how actually what they are doing because sometimes they seem to run riot without any controls whatsoever. And as one person sells a scam to rip a vulnerable person off, another person finds a 16-year-old girl and tells her she's fat and tells her and gets her into that net, that evil net of self-identification and self-deprecation, and draws them down into a very dark place. And this is something that I've been very passionate about in this place for a long while, and I just don't know why we're so scared to take these people on, but we obviously are. So this bill, as it comes forward, is going to hopefully, we'll never catch up with the scammers, because scammers by their very nature are criminal, and criminals, some of them, most of them are pretty stupid, but the good ones are quite ingenious, and the ingenious ones will find a new way, a better way to slip inside the net and to find the person who's vulnerable, find the person who is not as probably educated, and to be able to work out how to get hold of their money. In the story of scammers, we find people whose lives have been completely destroyed. It's not a case of them losing hundreds. It's not the case of some of them losing thousands. For some of them, it's not losing 10,000s, it's people who've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, who have lost access, because once a person has access to certain details, especially banking details, an incredibly dangerous thing. And this is what we get in certain areas. One of the other classic scams, of course, is people with all the livery and the impersonation of a bank, asking for details in regards changing of account, or we want to update information. People update their information, and when they come back, all the money, everything, has gone from their account. We also managed to follow through some of these scammers and to see that there's another insidious side to this. In prompting telephone calls, where you get a call from someone and they're obviously overseas, for me, it was always, I thought there was some sort of perverted fun to ask them about the score, if they're from Australia, what do they think of how Manly played on the weekend, or if you're in Melbourne, can you just tell me how did St Kilda go on the weekend?
From the tax office.
Or another way I always found to annoy them is to actually just keep talking to them forever, and ask them stupid questions and put on a stupid accent, and see if they want to go out for lunch, and until they realise that you're not vulnerable, you're crazy and annoying, and then they hang up on you. However, I didn't know, a lot of these people are basically slave labour in areas. They are literally slave labour. And in places such as Cambodia and stuff like that, they are indentured for nothing. They have no freedoms, and their life is an absolute misery. What we are talking about is a person who is basically locked in, who is in a room with other people, who are beaten up, who have no freedoms whatsoever. And this is the other side of scams, which a lot of people don't understand. And this is another reason why not only should we have legislation against the scammers, we should go to the source countries and really say, well, what are you doing to do this? Some people very ingeniously and very, very decently have said to the person, can other people hear what you are saying right now? Are you okay? Can you just tell me, are you all right? Are you free? Are you able to? And, on other occasions, people said, no, I'm not. And they said, where exactly are you?
A division has been called for in the House.
Thank you very much.
A division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. The proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions.
question is that this bill now read a second time, and I call the member for New England in continuation.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And Madam Deputy Speaker, it's also part of the telecommunications issue, this is so important. As I was just mentioning before, Madam Deputy Speaker, in a lot of countries, the people who actually make these scam calls are basically slave labour. They're locked up. It's quite an insidious circumstances. So I'm tempered somewhat my response to people when they call up, because I'm now considering exactly the circumstances that person finds themselves in the Philippines or Cambodia or the areas where they're at. And it's, so it's not just, this is bad on all levels, and that's another very good reason why we have to try and stamp it out. Because people can be contactable just about anywhere on the planet. That's why scammers find this so attractive. You don't have to walk down the street. In the past, scammers went door to door, knocking on them, trying to find gullible people, but now they don't have to. They just have a computer, it calls a number, and another person deals with the call, and off they go. But we've also, in trying to make sure even more of that world is covered, are trying to now also fight for further mobile phone towers for Kruapple, which is just out of Yetman, for Bunnan, which is in the Upper Hunter. I always start calling it Bunnan, it's Bunnan. Rochelle, which is also in the Upper Hunter. Gundy, which is Upper Hunter. Blue Mountain, which is Enmore to the Winterbourne areas. Further ones for Lagoon, Sandy Flat, which is south of Tenterville, Ranges Valley, Gyra, Niangla, Woolbrook, very important, because that's near me. I went to Woolbrook Public School. Port Stephens Cutting, which is incredibly dangerous, and we've got to fix it up, and I call on the government to get that $20 million out, because someone's going to get killed on that. Werris Creek, where I used to live, in Wellington Vale. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, by reason of mobile telecommunications there is that people are never aware. If they've got a phone in their pocket, if they've got SMSs, they're a potential target for scammers. And as such, we have to make sure that with this legislation and others, that we will never wipe them out, but we have to partially catch up, and that's what this legislation does.
Thank you. Member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much, Deputy Speaker. And my community in Chisholm, like so many communities around the country, are absolutely sick of scammers taking advantage of them. Scams are an absolute scourge.
A division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. The proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions. The question is, this bill now be read a second time, and in continuation I call the member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much, Deputy Speaker. And as I was saying, in my electorate of Chisholm, people are really worried about scams. It's an absolute scourge in our community. Over the last couple of years since I was elected, we've held many different scam forums to advise people in my electorate of what they can do to protect themselves from scams. We've held forums in local libraries, in community centres, bowling clubs, retirement villages and online, and we've had hundreds and hundreds of people attend. The spots for these forums are snapped up really quickly because people are so concerned about scams in the community. We have distributed thousands and thousands of booklets of the Little Black Book of Scams to community neighbourhood houses, to various different community groups and to many residents throughout our electorate. And a reminder to any Chisholm local who would like a copy of the Little Black Book of Scams, please contact my office. We're very happy to send you a copy. I'm sick of scams too. Like so many people, I get texts and phone calls almost every day. And I'm really pleased to be able to speak on this piece of legislation today and really proud to be part of a government that is taking meaningful action against scams. The Telecommunication Amendment SMS Centre ID Register Bill marks a really important step in our government's multi-pronged approach to combating SMS scams. The establishment and maintenance of a register by the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the ACMA, under this bill complements rules registered by the ACMA in 2022, which blocked more than 533 million scam texts between July of that year and March 2024. This register will also complement our broader, comprehensive approach to scams. This includes the establishment of a National Anti-Scam Centre, the NASC, or NASC, as an innovative, world-leading public-private sector partnership to disrupt and stop scammers in Australia, and the introduction of a scams code framework requiring telcos, banks and digital platforms to prevent, detect and disrupt scams. Now, just a little bit of advice to people who may be watching and interested in what they can do to protect themselves from scams.
A division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. The proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions. I call the member for Chisholm in continuation.
Thank you so much, Deputy Speaker. As I was saying earlier, there are some really practical things that people can do to try and protect themselves from scams.
A division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. The proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division. In continuation, I call the member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much once again, Deputy Speaker. There are a number of things people can do to protect themselves from scams. First is to stop and slow down the communications with someone who might have contacted you. Don't give in information to people who contact you via SMS or via phone or via email. Think, could it be fake? Is this a genuine communication? Verify with what the official contact number or website might be, and don't click links on SMSs that you may receive. Protect yourself. Think and act quickly. If you need to, contact your bank and make sure that you put a report through with ScamWatch. That's certainly what I do every time I'm contacted by a scammer. The scams that are targeted by this particular bill are fake text messages, which I know that we all receive, sent by SMS using a sender identification in the message header, which looks like that of a well-known company or brand such as banks, government agencies such as MyGov or Australia Post, or consumer product companies such as Coles or Lindt. And often scammers are relying on us being really busy and trusting these organisations so that we don't think about the communications we're receiving. But as I said, stop, think, protect. That can really help you when you're targeted by scammers. But there's obviously a very big role for government here, which is why we're introducing this legislation. Unfortunately, people who receive these SMS impersonation scams are often deceived into responding or taking action suggested by these text messages. These are absolutely not victimless crimes, and the theft of personal information or the money of innocent victims is an incredibly sad outcome of this scam SMS traffic. So this bill will require the ACMA to establish and maintain a register of legitimate sender IDs. The ACMA can also engage a contracted provider to partially or wholly maintain the register, and this bill allows for either a voluntary or mandatory register. Following public consultation on this issue earlier this year, an announcement of whether use of the register will be voluntary or mandatory for entities wishing to send messages using sender IDs will be made by the end of this year. This bill confers powers on the ACMA to make determinations by legislative instrument. These instruments will set out further requirements for access to the register and its administration and operation, and will need to be in place before the register does commence operation. An industry standard for telecommunications providers who manage SMS traffic will also be made by the ACMA. The standard will require telcos who manage SMS traffic to check SMS that use sender IDs to ascertain whether a sender ID is on the register and whether the sender is a registered party. If not, the telco could be required to block or tag the SMS as fraudulent. Once the framework for the register is fully established, businesses and entities can be invited to apply to have their sender IDs placed on the register. Once operating, the register will decrease the frequency and impact of SMS impersonation scams on consumers. The operation of the register will also increase protections for legitimate brands and agencies against bad actors impersonating them. Deputy Speaker, this will disrupt the business models for SMS impersonation scams. This register will boost public confidence in SMS as a communications channel. The operation of the register will ultimately make Australia a harder target for scam activity. Similar registers are already in operation in a number of other jurisdictions, including Singapore. The Singapore Sender ID Registry requires mandatory registration for organisations wishing to use SMS sender IDs. And research released in November of last year found that 87% of Singapore consumers said the register has made it easier to identify the legitimacy of SMS they receive. 63% also noted that the register has resulted in them receiving less spam or scam messages. And this is really good to restore confidence in the communications channel and to reduce the number of spam and scam messages. And this is what we want to see in Australia. A deferred commencement date for this Act will accommodate the fact that there are details relating to the application process and some operational features that are dependent on a government decision scheduled for later this year as to whether, as I mentioned earlier, the registration will be voluntary or mandatory. The register will need to deploy a complex ICT mechanism capable of interacting with systems and processes used by the telco industry, and it will, of course, need to have robust privacy and security settings. Commencement of the Act is by proclamation. If no proclamation occurs, the provisions will commence automatically 6 months after the Act receives the royal assent. And once the legislation commences, the ACMA will then be able to establish the register. To allow the ACMA the time needed to finalise these preparations, the bill provides that the ACMA must establish the register as soon as practicable. And this will provide the ACMA with the necessary flexibility to prepare for the commencement of the register's operation. And it is anticipated that the register will be operational by late 2025. The commencement of the register's operation is likely to be preceded by a transition period during which entities will submit and register their sender identifications. Now, it's really important, of course, that we try and do what we can to stay one step ahead of scammers, because often they use very sophisticated techniques to try and trick people. And something that often comes up during the scam forums that I hold is that people are embarrassed and ashamed that they've been targeted by scammers. But I want to reassure people that anyone can fall victim to scammers. This is what they do every day. They are very sophisticated at what they do, and they take advantage that people are busy. They often rely on making people feel that there is a sense of urgency. They play on emotion. These are manipulative, sophisticated players, and I want to really reiterate the importance of people making sure that they lodge any issue they've had with a scammer to ScamWatch, so that we're able to understand the nature and the scale of the problems, because every day there is a new scam. And our government is not naive in thinking that the register will provide a silver bullet against all future SMS impersonation scams. We know, as I mentioned just before, that scammers will invariably change tactics and use new methods to contact and ensnare would-be victims. And that's why the bill has inbuilt provisions to allow us to respond quickly. The bill provides the Minister for Communications to make determinations in the future by way of legislative instruments which will respond to a changing scam landscape. And that's what we're dealing with, a scam landscape. This will allow the Minister to determine future communication services other than SMS and MMS, which may use sender identifications in the future. Anything other than letters, symbols, and numbers which may be included in sender identifications in the future, and relevant information additional to accepted sender identifications that should be kept on the register in the future. The bill also provides the ACMA with the ability to make determinations by legislative instrument. The legislative instruments that the ACMA will make will set up further requirements for access to the register and its administration operation, and will need to be in place before the register commences operation. And these instruments can be amended in response to changed tactics by scammers, again, in order for us to do what we can as a government to stay one step ahead of these scammers. As the speeches so far in this chamber have indicated, there is an enormous public interest in this legislation and taking action against scammers. The development of this bill has been informed by 2 rounds of stakeholder and public consultation. The ACMA initially undertaking consultation in February 2023 with key stakeholders including telco providers, government agencies, merchants and consumer organisations to examine support for the establishment of a register. And there was subsequent consultation seeking feedback on the nature of the register to be adopted in Australia. And that is really to that question of whether the register should be mandatory or voluntary. Broad public consultation undertaken in February and March of this year. And it is expected that the ACMA will undertake even further targeted consultation on draft legislative instruments required to settle the detail of the register's processes. We're doing a lot to combat scammers. It's really important for our communities, and this is really good public policy. Through our Fighting Scams initiative measure, our government has committed $67.5 million over 4 years from 2024 to 25 onwards to combat scams and protect Australians from financial harms. supporting things like the introduction of mandatory industry codes to combat scams, the ACMA's work in enforcing compliance with telco industry operators through the Anti-Scams Code, and a campaign by the National Anti-Scam Centre on how to identify and to help consumers protect themselves from scams. And as I say, this is something that is enormously important to the people in my electorate of Chisholm, and I suspect electorates right across the country. The funding that provided in the May budget that I just mentioned is in addition to the $86.5 million over 4 years provided in last year's budget, which included the funding to establish the National Anti-Scam Centre within the ACCC from July of last year. And it's really great to see that that National Anti-Scam Centre and the work that they do is having some positive results. But of course there's more to do, hence the legislation before the House now. I'm really proud to be a part of a government taking action. I will continue to work with my community to educate people about what they can do to protect themselves from scams, but not just that, to communicate to my electorate the very important steps our government is taking so that we can remain one step ahead of these nefarious operators to make sure that our communities are safe from being targeted and losing access to their personal information and money in many cases. Thank you so much, Deputy Speaker.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Fowler.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And as we've just heard from members in this chamber about the extent that Australians are increasingly facing and confronted with spams and scams. And it's no surprise, as we're really spending so much more of our time on our mobile phones and our devices. Technology is wonderful in one way, but a curse in another. Many in this chamber are probably exacerbated with the number of times our mobile phones would ring, and then there's a mobile number that would appear that really we don't even know what that number is. Strange numbers appearing, or receiving text messages from organisations that looks like legitimate, such as Toll or Australia Post. And if you actually are an untrained eyes, you could actually click that link. And as the member of England said previously, do not click on any links that you receive on your mobile phones or on your emails. So unfortunately, this is such a norm in our society these days, with the scammers becoming more and more sophisticated in their craft and with the technology that's available for everybody to use. I know that for a fact that many of my constituents are concerned by the regular, unwanted and unsolicited spam and scam. Some have unfortunately fallen for these scams, as the text messages seem to be legitimate, as I said, in their eyes. My office in Fowler has received emails and calls from constituents who've been victims of this type of scams and cybercrime. One fell victim to a cryptocurrency scheme with scammers convincing them to verify their transactions and identify through a, quote, a bank, which clearly does not exist. This all occurred via text message, and he lost $59,000. As you can see, these are very real experiences of cybercrime or scams, which could be prevented. So my understanding is that this bill would set up an SMS sender ID registry, which I believe could help tackle cybercrime, namely prevention. Now, once criminals have access to our private information or steal our identity, digital identity, it's very difficult to either recover our privacy or to prosecute the offenders. And often these criminals come from outside of Australia. My office recently met with the Joint Policing Cybercrime Coordination Centre, or JPC3, to seek information on what advice to give our Fowler residents. And I'm really in awe of their work, what they do in investigating and analysing cybercrime on a national and international scale. It's incredible that their work has led to the prosecution of cybercriminals in other countries through their interagency work, Deputy Speaker. For a vital part of their work is in passing on the lessons learned through their investigations to Australians to inform and prevent these crimes from happening in the first place. Australians are really urged to look at the website maintained for this purpose,
cyber.gov.au. The information on this site could prevent a world of pain, as well as helping those who have been victims of these criminals. Now, the member for Chisholm also mentioned the Black Scam, the little Black Scam book, and my office also have ordered these books that are available for our community. One of the things I did ask, for this book is to also be in languages, and we're hoping that there'll be availability in languages because, as we know, communities such as Fowler, where 70% of our population are from non-English speaking backgrounds and are often very vulnerable to scams, this kind of material in languages will be very, very helpful. So it is important, Deputy Speaker, to remember that these criminals and individuals and networks who are exploiting us, and it's especially hard for elderly Australians or for Australians with intellectual disabilities to spot scam messages. And, as I mentioned, new Australians for whom English is not their first language, like many in my Fowler electorate. They're also very vulnerable to these messages, not only because of language barrier, but because government-used SMS technology might be new to them. Falling for these scams often makes people feel stupid or humiliated, and they are not. This bill places the emphasis where it should be, not on the victim, but on making it more difficult for the criminal. I acknowledge that there was industry-wide consultation ahead of writing this bill, and I also welcome the flexibility that the bill affords in responding to developing technologies, as we know that these can change rapidly. The cost of establishing and maintaining the register is about $10.9 million over 4 years, with ongoing costs of around $2.2 million per year thereafter. It sounds like a lot of money, but in the context of the $3.1 billion that the ACCC reported was stolen through scams in 2022, I believe this investment will help protect our Australian public. The work of the JP3 and other law enforcement programs has seen a reduction in SMS scams by 13.1% in 2023, according to the ACCC. I welcome this news. And in supporting this bill, my hope is that it will help to reduce SMS scams that much further. As Australians, we've taken up the convenience of accessing our banking, government departments, shopping as well, and do other activities and other daily transactions using our mobile phones. And with AI technology now widely adopted, we must also be on alert when using such technology. It can certainly assist us, but also hinders us, as they can be deadly weapons in scams. However, we can't surrender the benefits of existing and future technologies to those who would abuse them to steal from us. So for us here in the chamber and those who are well educated and well informed and have access to technology, access to information, and English is their first language, I think scamming, being victims of scam for us is probably less than those that are from vulnerable communities. So I really, while I really support this bill, I really call on the government to ensure that the vulnerable people in our communities, in communities like Fowler, where English is a second language, much more has to be done to ensure that they are protected from the spams and scams. And not to mention, there are obviously increasing spam messages as well on social media. So the social media part of that is another aspect that this bill is probably not going to delve into. But I have no doubt for many small businesses who are using many of our social media platforms to do business, they're constantly receiving so much spam messages there that is interrupting their transaction of the daily businesses. So something has to be done to assist the many small businesses that are relying on the platforms, the social media platforms to transaction, but also in many of their mobile phone transactions as well. So we must not forget the vulnerable in our communities and the small businesses in our community that are very much, will be vulnerable to the scams. So as we continue to make interaction with government and other important agencies and businesses easier and more effective, we must put in safeguards to protect Australians.
So the bill is a good step in achieving the protection, and so I will definitely be supporting it. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
And I thank the member Fowler for their contribution. The question before the House is that this bill be now read a second time, and I give the call to the member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. One afternoon, I found myself listening to Ben Fordham's podcast on 2GB, where I heard the story of Paul Treffry. Paul's a small business owner who received a text message from ANZ informing him that his business account had been compromised. The message offered him two choices: cancel his credit card or transfer money to a new account. Paul chose the latter and transferred $130,000 to a bank account. Deputy Speaker, the problem was that the message wasn't from ANZ. His phone said it was from ANZ, but it was from scammers, and the bank account wasn't his either. Paul lost $130,000. For any business, let alone a small business, that is a significant amount. And this is not just Paul's story, it's the story of many Australians who have fallen victim to similar scams. Since raising this issue in the House Economics Committee last year, I've heard countless heartbreaking accounts of people being swindled out of their life savings. Their stories have taught me that anyone, regardless of age or background or education, can be deceived by these sophisticated criminals. When the government came to office, Australians were losing over $3 billion a year to scams. This is a staggering figure, and what's more alarming is that the amount lost to scams has doubled each year from 2019 to 2022. Online, text message, phone, and even in-person scams have become primary avenues through which Australians lose their money. These scams strip individuals of their financial resources, they destroy lives, erode trust, and undermine confidence in our economic and communication systems. In 2019, the losses to scams were already in the billions, but by 2022, the amount had skyrocketed over $3 billion. Victims of scams often face more than just a financial loss. They experience a deep sense of violation and shame, with many struggling to recover their confidence and rebuild their lives. As scammers siphon billions from the economy, the ripple effects are felt right across sectors, affecting everything from consumer spending to stability of small businesses and driving up small business costs as well. When individuals lose their savings, they cut back on spending, which in turn affects businesses that rely on consumer confidence. Small businesses like Paul Treffry's can be especially vulnerable, as a single scam can mean the difference between staying afloat or going under and completely ruin a small business's cash flow. Moreover, as we heard from the member for Fowler, scams disproportionately affect the most vulnerable in society: the elderly, those with limited digital literacy, those with English as a second language, and those who are already struggling financially. These individuals are often targeted by scammers who exploit their trust and lack of familiarity with digital platforms, and the consequences can be devastating. In response to this growing crisis, Deputy Speaker, our government has taken decisive action. Under our leadership, we've established the National Anti-Scam Centre, which has already made significant strides in the fight against scams. One of the centre's early successes was the implementation of measures that blocked more than 533 million scam texts between July 22 and March 24. The establishment of the National Anti-Scam Centre was a key promise we made to the Australian people, and one that we've delivered. It's bringing world-leading initiative, bringing together public and private sector partners to work together to disrupt and stop scammers in their tracks. It's a model of what can be achieved when we work together across sectors and tackle complex problems. We've also bolstered the Australian Securities and Investment Commission's capacity to shut down fraudulent websites, further cutting off scammers' avenues to exploit vulnerable Australians. And the establishment of Australia's first SMS sender ID registry is another crucial component of this strategy, and why I'm commending this bill to the House today. This registry, which is at the heart of the Telecommunication Amendment Bill, will play a pivotal role in preventing scammers from impersonating trusted brands through SMS, just like they did with Paul. This approach is comprehensive, combining technology, regulation and public awareness to create a multi-layered defence against scams. We recognise that no single measure can eliminate the threat entirely, but by attacking scammers from multiple angles, we can significantly reduce the risk to Australians. The SMS Sender ID Register Bill requires the Australian Communications and Media Authority to establish and maintain a register of legitimate sender IDs. This means that businesses and entities will be able to register their sender IDs in telcos. They'll be required to check SMS messages that use these IDs. If a sender ID is not registered, the telco could be required to block the message or tag it as fraudulent. This is a significant step forward in our fight against SMS impersonation scams. It will decrease the frequency and impact of these scams on consumers by disrupting the business model of these criminals. Moreover, it will provide legitimate brands and agencies with greater protection against bad actors who seek to exploit their trusted names. And one of the key aspects of this bill is its flexibility. The ACMA can engage a contracted provider to help maintain the register, and the use of the register can be made either voluntary or mandatory, depending on the government's decision later this year. This flexibility ensures that we can adapt to the evolving landscape of scam tactics and stay one step ahead of these scammers. The significance of this register cannot be overstated. By creating this legitimate, centralised database of sender IDs, we will make it much, much more difficult for scammers to impersonate trusted brands, and the scammers will then go elsewhere. Let me share another story, Deputy Speaker, of Diane and Mon, who were recently targeted by a similar scam. They received a text message from what appeared to be HSBC AU, stating that a new login to their mobile app was detected in Perth. The message advised them to call a number if it wasn't them, which they did. The call played HSBC hold music, and when a man answered, he claimed he was from HSBC and that he could help with the issue. Diane and Mon, local constituents in Bennelong, were concerned and they were eager to protect their life savings, and they followed the instructions of the impersonator. They provided their username and authenticated by reading back SMS codes sent to their phone, believing they were dealing with a legitimate bank representative. Suddenly, the call ended abruptly. Sensing something was wrong, they called back and were shocked when the same man answered. It was then that their suspicions were confirmed. The scammer admitted that their money had already been stolen. Devastated, Diane and Mon immediately contacted HSBC, and after being on hold for 20 minutes, they reported the unauthorised transaction and requested that both their accounts and the recipient's HSBC account be frozen. To their dismay, HSBC staff informed them that she could not refreeze the recipient's accounts. Diane and Mon felt abandoned by the very institution they trusted to protect their money. Their experience is a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities in our current systems and the urgent needs for stronger protections, in particular for banks to do much more to protect their clients' money. Had this SMS ID register been in place, Diane and Mon would never have received that text message purporting to be from HSBC. The scammer would not have been able to spoof HSBC's sender ID, and the fraudulent message would have likely been blocked before it even reached their phones. This is the protection that this bill seeks to provide, and this has been happening for too long. It's taken this government to do something about it. One of the main tactics scammers use is to trick people in thinking they're receiving a message from a trusted source. By establishing this register, we can help prevent fraudulent messages reaching Australians in the first place. This bill sets a precedent for how we can protect Australians and their money from other forms of communications and scams in the future. As technology evolves, so too do the methods that these scammers use. It's not about addressing the current threat, it's about building a framework that can be adapted to protect Australians from future scams. The government is continuing to fighting scams. In addition to the measures in this bill, we're committing an extra $67.5 million over the next 4 years to protect Australians' money. This funding will support the introduction of mandatory industry codes to combat scams, enhance regulators' enforcement capabilities, and launch a public campaign to educate Australians on how to identify and protect themselves from scams. And the importance of public education cannot be overstated. While technological and regulatory measures are crucial, they must be complemented by efforts to raise awareness amongst the public. That's why when local MPs do scam forums out in their communities, they are so well attended. The government and the agencies simply need to do more to help educate our communities on simple steps they can take to ensure that their money remains safe. Scammers often rely on the ignorance of their victims, people who may not be aware of the latest methods or who may not know how to authenticate the message that they've received from a website or through social media or by email. By educating the public, we can empower Australians to protect themselves and reduce the impact of scams. Importantly too, we're working on establishing tough new mandatory codes that will place robust obligations on key sectors, starting with banks, telcos, and of course, those digital platforms that we know carry a lot of the scammers' messages. These sectors are the most commonly targeted by scammers, and it's essential that they take more responsibility for protecting consumers. In both the two circumstances I gave you today, Deputy Speaker, you could argue the bank was aware that these methods were being used to scam these people's money. And the mandatory codes seek to address that and ensure that banks are fined and in some circumstances will need to refund customers when they are aware of the scams that are taking place. These mandatory codes will be a significant step forward in holding banks, social media and telcos accountable for their role in preventing scams. We want to create a safer environment for consumers to transfer money and to protect their life savings. Deputy Speaker, the stories I've shared today, I've done so with the authority of local constituents who've contacted me. We need to share these stories because they highlight the urgent need for stronger protection and proactive measures to safeguard Australians from the ever-evolving tactics of scammers. I urge the entire Parliament to support this bill and show to these scammers that we're taking a stand against criminals who prey on our most vulnerable citizens. And we're sending a message to the world that Australia will no longer be an easy target for their craft.
And I thank the member for Bennelong. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I give the call to the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Mobile phones have changed the way we live, but not always for the better. As phones moved from the kitchen counter to our pockets, we became more accessible, easier to contact, and unfortunately more accessible to scammers. Last year, we saw a 37% increase in SMS scams reported compared to 2022. Deputy Speaker, this year alone, we've tragically seen almost $6 million lost in SMS scams. Of course, not all scam losses are reported, so the real cost is far greater. But what is crystal clear, Deputy Speaker, is that scammers are exploiting the digitalisation of our economy. The Albanese government recognises this and is acting. We understand that urgent action is needed, and that's what this bill is all about. The Telecommunications Amendment, SMS Sender ID Register Bill 2024 will require the Australian Communications and Media Authority to establish and maintain an SMS Sender ID Register. This register will be used to verify senders like MyGov, AusPost, and importantly for Victorians, toll providers. It will help protect Australians from sophisticated scams which target our most vulnerable. Deputy Speaker, it is hard to imagine an Australian who has not received a scam text message purporting to be from a bank or a toll road operator. I've received them myself, and I hear from so many of my constituents who are fed up with the onslaught of scams targeting their inboxes. And that's why, under this bill, telcos would need to confirm whether messages using sender's ID were being sent by authorised parties, and if not, they would be blocked or include a warning. These fraudsters operate domestically and overseas and use sophisticated technologies to trick innocent Australians into divulging sensitive information in order to steal their money or their personal information. The consequent financial losses and stress suffered is immense. And at a time when the cost of living is putting pressure on everyday Australians, our government is acting to reduce the anxiety of potential identity theft, financial loss and personal safety. Deputy Speaker, earlier this year, the Minister for Financial Services and I hosted a scam awareness forum in Torquay, where we heard firsthand about these challenges from community members. One community member said they'd lost thousands of dollars to a scammer. Many others in the room shared similar stories about friends and loved ones. It was not easy to hear. People have lost their life savings. It does take courage, however, to admit you are a victim of scammers. And I understand that people will feel uncomfortable admitting to a packed-out room they've been scammed. But it's so important that victims reach out for help and share their stories. It's these stories that help inform police and government at all levels and to tackle scammers and put in place supports for victims. I'm proud that our government has listened and is acting to put in place more supports for scam victims. I'm also proud that these measures are having impact in bringing down losses to scams. Data released by the ACCC in April this year indicated estimated scam losses were down 13.1% in 2023 from 2022. However, while losses have decreased and progress is being made, Australians are still losing too much, way too much. There is no silver bullet to eliminate scam activity. Scammers will adapt and utilise new methods to contact would-be victims. But the creation of this register will complement our anti-scam measures and make it harder, much harder for scammers. And once operational, this register will be used to decrease the frequency and impact of SMS impersonation scams on consumers. It will increase protections for legitimate brands and agencies against bad actors impersonating them, disrupt the business models for SMS impersonation scams, restore public confidence in SMS as a communications channel, and ultimately make Australia a harder target for scam activity. Now, we know the changes arising from this bill can't be put in place overnight, but that's why the bill allows for a deferred commencement date. As part of that, we'll make clear that if the provisions do not commence within 6 months, they would commence on the day after the day at the end of that period. This recognises that the ACMA will require time to finalise technical and operation aspects for the register, which is likely to be complex. According to this bill, it provides that the ACMA must establish the register as soon as is practicable. The bill defines what is meant by a sender identification and will also provide the Minister for Communications with the authority to determine other communication services which employ sender identifications that may be registered in the future. The essential elements for applications, refusal of applications, prevention of impersonation of sender identifications and removal of entries from the register are explicitly embedded in the bill. However, new powers will be conferred on the ACMA to make determinations. These will set out further requirements for access to the register and its administration and operation. This is important work, Deputy Speaker, and will complement the progress our government has made in combating scams. Our government has already delivered an additional $67.5 million in the 24-25 budget as part of our second tranche of reforms to crack down on scammers. The success of our Phase 1 measures reinforces our resolve to take on these criminals. The budget funding supports the introduction of mandatory industry codes and increased use of the secure e-invoicing network. Under our government, industry codes will start with banks, telcos, social media, digital messaging and search advertising services, and we will require these groups to have measures in place to prevent, detect, disrupt, respond and report scams. This will be complemented by strong regulator enforcement action, penalties for non-compliance and victim compensation where wrongdoing occurs. The government will also provide regulators with $37.3 million to administer and enforce the mandatory industry codes. This includes $12.4 million for the Australian Communications and Media Authority over 4 years to oversee the review and improvement of existing scam call and SMF code for telcos, and boost reinforcement action to prevent, detect and disrupt scams. The budget also provides $180 million for the ATO to identify and stop fraudsters, which will include IT system upgrades to block attempts to break into taxpayer accounts. Deputy Speaker, there's clear evidence that our scam crackdown is working, but losses remain far too high as our economy continues rapidly down the path of digitisation. We can expect this pace of change to accelerate. The profound impact of this change has a direct bearing on the expectations of government and business. The first responsibility of government is to keep its people secure. The responsibility of business is to abide by the laws of the country in which they operate. Globalisation and its impact on society, culture and the economy challenges the way government and businesses approach these responsibilities, but it does not displace them. Time and distance have become compressed. Information is transmitted around the world through digital platforms and SMS in an instant. Goods are purchased online in a global marketplace before being delivered rapidly to your door to even the smallest regional towns. Retail transactions and finance are now overwhelmingly digital. All of this is facilitated by enormous amounts of personal data being stored and shared throughout the economy. The pandemic only accelerated this trend, and that's why we are implementing an ambitious anti-scam agenda. It's why we continue to introduce strategies that protect people's hard-earned savings and make it harder for scammers to operate. Deputy Speaker, we want to be a world leader when it comes to scam prevention, and this bill will go a long way towards making that a reality and to saving many people from losing their life savings. Thank you.
And I thank the member for Craigenmite. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I give the call to the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. More and more Australians are being hit by scams. In 2023, Australians lost $2.7 billion to scams. We made over 601,000 scam reports, an 18.5% increase on 2022. And this despite the ACMA blocking more than 533 million scam texts and 1.9 million scam calls between July 2022 and March 2024. Investment scams caused the most harm, taking $1.3 billion. Remote access scams took $256 million. And while we may laugh about some of the more obvious scams going around, they work, otherwise they wouldn't still happen. These are not some random effort. These are highly targeted and coordinated efforts. Some years ago, when I was doing some training on cybersecurity, I heard about a scam group operating out of Europe that had been broken up. The leads consisted of a couple of PhDs in computing and 4 PhDs in psychology, because we, humans, are the weak link, and the scammers know that social engineering, conning us, convincing us to click on the blue link, is the key to accessing our bank accounts, accessing our credit cards, accessing our identity information, accessing our confidential information, and accessing our computers at home and at work. And increasingly I hear from people in Boothby about how convincing these scams are. They mimic banks, they mimic government departments, utility companies, retailers. They look convincing. And given so much of our lives are conducted electronically via SMS, email and online access, we are all vulnerable. Unfortunately, people receiving these SMS impersonation scams are often deceived into responding or taking actions suggested by these text messages. One click when you're tired, stressed, when you're expecting a message and something comes through at just the wrong time and looks convincing. And these scammers make it their business to look convincing. That one click can put you into a world of pain. The loss of life savings, of identity documents, loss of confidence. But playing whack-a-mole with scammers is a losing game. As fast as one number is blocked, they come through on another. There has to be a better way, a way that can give Australians confidence that when they get a text that it is really from their known entity, or they can ignore it or block and delete. So as part of a comprehensive range of measures, the Albanese Labor government is putting in place to combat scammers.
Boothby will resume their seat. It being 6:30 p.m, the debate is interrupted in accordance with Standing Order 192B. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting. The member for Boothby will have leave to continue speaking when the debate is resumed on a future day. And I call the clerk.
Government business, order of the day number 2, grievance debate, resumption of debate on the question that grievances be noted.
And I thank the clerk. The question now is that grievances be noted, and I give the call to the member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to raise my grievance in relation to a number of issues, in particular the current state of the economy and the stress and the cost of living crisis impacting so many. Inflation remains sticky at 3.8%, above the target range of the Reserve Bank. Interest rates are also high for many, putting pressure on household budgets. Food prices have risen sharply in the last 3 years, fuelling cost of living pressures and food insecurity. Affordable housing is becoming a thing of the past. Small businesses are being suffocated by red tape and many face the threat of closure. There have been some initiatives of late to provide cost of living relief, from stage 3 tax cuts coming to effect, cheaper medicines, energy bill relief, but the sticky tail of inflation still means many in the community feel like they're actually falling behind, and they are. And I should note that very few in this place are in fact addressing one of the biggest drivers of inflation, being the incredible rise in insurance costs, and those insurance costs being incredibly driven by increasing risk, which is driven by our changing climate and warming. And I will have more to say on this. But in relation to housing, the government is not thinking quickly or creatively enough about how to further drive down costs for Australians. All of the policies to date are focused on supply. Now, whilst increasing supply is, of course, essential, this is not something that is a short-term fix. Supply will take years to achieve, and in the meantime, the government has resisted all other policies that could increase the availability of supply in the short term, other than just from a construction model. Rental inflation is expected to go as high as it was during the 2008 global financial crisis and remain elevated until some 2026. This puts pressure on around the 1/3 of Australians who rent. In Warringah, nearly 35% of residents are renters, and we know new dwelling approvals are declining just as our housing shortage is reaching crisis levels. So a lot needs to be done, and as I've called for previously, we also, whilst we look at those challenges, need to address the increasing climate risk. And we need to make sure we actually, whilst we put in place measures, we also incentivise landlords, home builders and people in regional and rural communities to decarbonise. It is absolute folly if we continue building as we have and not do so addressing the risks that are increasing already. We need to urgently assist households to get off gas. How many times I've sat in this place and listened to absolute just exaggerations in relation to gas, all because of stakeholder interest, political gain. beggars belief that some of the things that I've had to listen to in this place. But we absolutely must help households get off gas. They are inflationary prices impacting their bottom line. We need to help households get to rooftop solars and batteries, to electrify their cars, their water, their home heating, and in particular their cooking, because that has huge health benefits, but also cost of living benefits. They will save huge amounts of money. The input is from nature. The input to all of those devices is free. And so whilst we currently rely on systems like gas, like petrol, that are all inflationary, that are hurting households, if we can assist them to get off all those mechanisms or current sort of fuel sources, we will in fact address inflation and help households with cost of living. Decoupling energy from fossil fuels will deliver savings and provide Australians with energy independence and protect from inflationary pressures. That is why the big legislation in the US is called the Inflation Reduction Act. But there is very little conversation of that here from the government, and certainly not from the opposition. By helping households decarbonise, we reduce the average bill by around $1,100 to $1,800 a year with rooftop solar. It goes as high as by around $500 to $1,600 with simply more efficient electrical appliances, and by even more when you add insulation and improve energy efficiency to homes. But the government has been slow on the uptake in this regard, and we could be doing so much more than we are. And whilst we hear criticism from the opposition around inflation and cost of living crisis, we see no solutions, and certainly no acknowledgement that linked with decarbonisation and electrification of households comes cost savings that help cost of living crisis. The Household Energy Upgrades Fund, announced in the 2023 federal budget, took a year to begin dispensing funds, such as the $60 million to the provision of low-interest green loans for residential energy efficiency upgrades. That is just too slow, and we are still seeing households struggle, and it takes so much time for them to get access. Similarly to households, small businesses are suffering enormously from high interest rates, high and rising insurance costs. I have so many emails from local businesses concerned at the rate of increase of insurance for their business, the high energy prices, staff shortages, and low consumer confidence. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy. They make up 97.3% of businesses in Australia. In Warringah, they make up so much. They're a vibrant hub of economic activity. We have over 8,000 small employing businesses, with another 12,000 as sole traders. But right now, 43% of small businesses are not breaking even. In March this year, Cosborough reported that 1,000 businesses became insolvent, the worst on record since 2015. But yet there has not been any real addressing of that from the Minister for Small Businesses or the Treasurer that really could give the sector and small business owners any confidence that they actually have the attention of the government. Small business owners are paying themselves less than the average salary and working longer than the median hours of work to keep the lights on. And the most recent numbers from the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry paint an even grimmer picture. 45% of small businesses have considered closure in the last 12 months. 82% of small businesses said red tape is having either a major or a moderate impact on their operations, and 50% of small businesses said the overall impact of red tape has increased in the past 12 months. And I've been critical of the government with successive IR changes and the difficulty around the small business provisions. It does impact the efficiency and the economic viability of so many small businesses. So they urgently need relief, but unfortunately that urgency is nowhere to be seen of late from the government, and I should say from the opposition. Everyone comes to this place claiming to be here on behalf of small business, but whilst in government or in opposition, there are no actual solutions put forward to actually help small businesses. And it's this sense of policy malaise that continues to turn so many voters from the major parties. And we're going to see this accelerate now as we get closer to a timeline towards the next federal election. Lots of promises, but what really needs to look at is the record, what's been happening over the last few years, and who is actually delivering any real outcome for those that are hurting. I should also say the major parties' conduct in themselves is quite telling. In this cost of living crisis, where Australians and small businesses are looking for assistance, what's been reported and leaked to the media over the last several weeks is that in considering once-in-a-generation reform of our electoral laws, it seems to be that the core element of that will be to amend donations and increase public funding essentially to the major parties. So there is an irony that in this cost of living crisis where Australians are crying up for support, our focus at the moment appears to be by the government to make electoral reform in relation to donations, putting spending caps, putting donation caps, thus entrenching incumbent advantage on the duopoly of the major parties, whilst then making up for that lost income by increasing public funding. There is a really deep cynicism in that respect, and I think one that voters will see through as they abandon major parties and look for alternatives and the crossbench that is swelling. And I encourage communities to think about that, to think about, are your representatives genuinely putting in the representation and putting forward the arguments that benefit your community as opposed to a party view or just taking power or holding on to power. We know that while many are feeling the pinch from prolonged inflation and rising costs on housing, power bills, insurance, groceries, it's galling to see now that this proposal that has been inflated. Of course, the community overwhelmingly has said what they do want is politicians to hold themselves to the same standard as what exists in consumer law when it comes to their advertising. So what voters of all persuasions have said, they want truth in political advertising. They want protection so that they can't be scammed of their vote by lies in political advertising. So the big question will be for the government when it reveals its legislation, will they respond to the call of the community?
The question is, the grievance has been noted, and I give the call to the member for Tangi.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. A few months ago, I attended the Alfred Cove Art Society exhibition in my electorate of Tangney. The exhibition was part of the Melville Open Studio, where local artists opened their studios and spaces to the public. As I walked through the exhibition, it was so inspiring to see the work of some of the many artists in Tangney. Landscapes that capture the beauty of Western Australia, portraits that express people's heart and souls, and still life painting with such beautiful details. One watercolor caught my eyes. 3 koi fish swimming in the bluest of waters. Title, Pool Party. The painting is bright and joyous, but also has a sense of calm. It brought a smile to my face. I purchased the painting and is now hanging proudly in my office. When I went to collect the painting, I met the artist, Monica Taylor. Monica shared with me her love of watercolors and some of the children's books she has written and illustrated. I particularly like her book about 2 robots who are learning to write in English. It brought back memories of when I was studying English at TAFE and learned about the part of speech. Arts help us connect and communicate in ways that sometimes words cannot. Last month, I also attended the opening of the Chong Yung Chai exhibition. The title is Story of a Journey from Malaysia to Australia at the Wireless Hill Museum in Tangney. Yong Chai is an artist from Malaysia, and for his exhibition, he listened to the story of Malaysian migrant to Australia. Yong Chai's book brought back memory of my own migration. It made me reflect on different and similar journey that I share with some of the many migrants' family in Tangney. How we set our route, how we work hard to give our children better opportunities, and how we join our tradition of char kway teow with new custom flat whites. 2 of the paintings brought tears to my eyes. In one, they were the word of a young child. Before coming here, Dad worked non-stop and only rest during Chinese New Year. Coming here, we got to go on holiday. I got to know him better. Yong Chai's painting, the child and the father relaxing in a field, the car parked nearby. Looking at that painting was like looking in a mirror. When my family and I moved to Australia in 2002, I finally have the time to spend with my family. We drove to the Pinnacle and the Monkey Maya, and we spent weeks together talking, eating, and laughing. To me, Yong Chai's painting reflects the value of family. A second painting described the journey of migration. After living overseas, us, migrants, return home to the cemetery to see our parents. This painting also me. I lost my mom during COVID. I have not seen her for 3 years. And the next time I went to see her, it was at the cemetery. My heart was heavy as I looked into this painting. A sadness that is unspeakable. And at the same time, I felt a common bond that many of us migrants share together. This gives me comfort. The Albanese Labor government is making strong investment in Australia's art, entertainment, and culture sectors. We are investing in support our live music scene, promote Australian story, and supporting our brilliant art training organizations. These investments include the $115.2 million to Australia's 8 national art training organizations. We need to ensure that we are nurturing the next generation of creative talent. $14.5 million is being invested to support the production of Australian children's scene content. Just how I saw myself reflected in Yong Chai's painting. It is important for Australian children to see themselves reflected in the story they watch or they experience. A $9.3 million investment will help the National Film and Sound Archive expand and enhance its capacity to store highly flammable nitrate-based cultural heritage material belonging to our national collecting institutions. And we are investing in live music. $8.6 million for the Revive Live program to provide essential support to live music venue and festivals showcasing Australian band and artists. And $5.2 million to expand and develop the Canberra and Darwin Symphony Orchestras. These investments build on progress the Albanese Labor government has already made. It is important for us to continue to tell Australian stories and to support the Australian artists who tell this story in such an inspiring and powerful ways. Whether those stories be of migrant or a beautiful mosaic that show the incredible culture diversity of Tangney, or an upcoming fundraising concert in Tangney by the Rotary Club in Etterdale that will showcase music from some of our favorite film and opera, or some of the many writers that I met out in Tangney. They have important stories to tell, inspired by their own histories and journeys, by the beauty of Western Australia, or sometimes by the common feelings we have that make all humans. We have that make all of us human. I recently attended an exhibition of painting and ceramic that at Edwell House in Tangney. The exhibition title is Earth, Fire and Water, show works of members of the Alfred Cove Art Society and the South of the River Porters Club. These are two of our great local arts groups who collaborated for a powerful exhibition. I enjoy seeing how each artist interpreted their theme. Abstract landscapes or boat out on the water, familiar places and objects captured in a new way. I have the chance to meet many of the artists in Tangney. They are people from all backgrounds and all experiences. And at the exhibition, I saw how the artists and their works all came together. It is not only the work of art that touch people. The artists themselves also leave a deep impression. Different stories and perspectives coming together in one place. I saw fellowship and community as the artists about their work and the process and thinking that goes into each piece of the art. I also saw reflection as the artists share their stories and supported each other. I'm proud that there are so many talented artists in Tangney. And proud that we have many arts organizations who do everything from organize exhibition to provide classes for artists in all stages of their career, both young and old. The art provides opportunity for Tangney community to come together and celebrate, but also learn from one another. And when we learn from each other and from each other's experience, we can better understand each other. I believe our Tangney artists are an important part of our community. I believe that we need to continue to support the arts and our artists. Thank you all for all your powerful work. Thank you.
And I thank the member for Tangney. The question is that grievances be noted, and I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business, the member for Bradfield.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I take this opportunity to speak about a controversial investment decision made by the Albanese Labor government, which raises serious questions. This is Labor's decision to invest almost $1 billion of taxpayers' money into the American company PsiQuantum. This deal has been cloaked in secrecy from the beginning, with the Albanese Labor government and Minister Ed Husic going to great lengths to avoid scrutiny and transparency. It is clear, though, on the available evidence that this investment does not meet the normal standards of contestability, fairness and probity that would be expected from a funding decision of this size. According to Minister Husic, there's nothing to worry about. In the Weekend Australian recently, he was quoted as saying that the PsiQuantum proposal was put through an exhaustive assessment led by the public service and complemented by technical, legal, commercial and national security experts. Sadly, this perspective is not shared by many in Australia's quantum sector, nor is it supported by the evidence that the opposition has been able to gather through Senate estimates processes and freedom of information requests. What we've learned is troubling. The Albanese government agreed to assess an unsolicited proposal from PsiQuantum as early as November 2022, 9 months before the expression of interest process opened and 6 months before the National Quantum Strategy was released. The Department of Industry entered into a non-binding agreement with PsiQuantum in June 2023, 2 months prior to the expression of interest process. All of this suggests that the expression of interest process was a reverse-engineered sham designed to cover up the reality that Minister Husic had already made his decision. I have written to the Auditor-General requesting that the Australian National Audit Office undertakes an investigation into the Australian government's investment in PsiQuantum. I've asked a series of questions. Why did the government decide to make the investment in response to an unsolicited proposal from PsiQuantum? When did interaction occur between the Minister's office and PsiQuantum's venture capitalist executives and lobbying firms, and what was the nature of that intervention? Why was the national interest framework not used in arriving at this decision? When did the government reach its decision to make this investment? How did the government assess PsiQuantum's claims, including but not limited to PsiQuantum's technology being able to deliver at scale in the timeframe that PsiQuantum claimed? Why did the government not instead decide to establish and announce a program to fund investments in quantum companies with publicly announced guidelines and invite any interested company to put forward an application to be assessed against the guidelines? Had the government reached its decision to make the investment prior to conducting the expression of interest process? Why did government officials advise companies other than PsiQuantum prior to the EOI that there was no dedicated funding available for Australian companies? Why did the government carry out extensive engagement with PsiQuantum prior to conducting the EOI process? Why was the EOI process secret and not publicly announced? Why was the EIO conducted through the sending of a single email with no follow-up by the department to even ascertain whether the recipients of the email had seen it and opened it? Why were the EIO participants given only 4 weeks to prepare and provide their response when PsiQuantum had been given a period of some 9 months to develop its proposal and to engage in extensive discussions about the proposal with the Australian and Queensland governments? Why were the companies which participated in the EOI process not given the same opportunities as PsiQuantum for direct engagement and discussion with Australian government officials and representatives up to and including the Minister for Industry and Science? Why were the companies which participated in the EOI process specifically directed as a term of participating that they could not directly approach nor speak with Australian government officials? Were the terms of the EOI biased towards PsiQuantum's technology and claimed delivery dates? How did the government assess the value for money of the EOI proposals and PsiQuantum's proposal? What criteria and weighting were used? Was the negative impact on the Australian-based quantum companies considered when allocating funding to a United States company? Why was a technology-agnostic expression of interest process not considered at the start of the process? Why was the EOI limited by the requirement to deliver a quantum computer at the earliest possible time only, rather than considering a weighted assessment of time to deliver, amount of local supply chain production in Australia, likelihood for the technology to be proven, upscaled and delivered on the proposed time frame, a capability usefulness, total investment required and amount of funding remaining in Australia? Did EOI applicants receive a fair process in terms of application and assessment? Was it a foregone conclusion, given the terms of the EOI, that the funding would go to PsiQuantum, and none of the companies invited to participate had any real or serious chance of being selected through the EOI? Why was Export Finance Australia directed to commence work on the investment into PsiQuantum before the EOI had concluded? Was the EOI nothing more than a sham? How did the government satisfy itself that the optimal path to support the quantum computing sector in Australia was to invest a large amount in one company and in one technology, and how was that company and that technology selected? Why did the government not choose to make smaller investments across a range of companies consistent with the approach being used by a range of other governments? Why was a testbed not considered? What initial and subsequent advice did the department and the chief scientist provide to the Minister's office on the draft and final versions of the National Quantum Strategy and regarding providing funding for PsiQuantum? Did Minister Husick's senior advisor Ellen Broad have a conflict of interest, given that she has a close personal friendship with a senior Blackbird employee, Kate Glazebrook, and given that Blackbird is an existing investor in PsiQuantum, and given that the investment would likely have increased the value of Blackbird's existing holding in PsiQuantum? Did Minister Husick take appropriate steps to recognise and manage the actual or perceived conflict of interest faced by his senior advisor, Ellen Broad? Was the decision to make the investment influenced by the fact that PsiQuantum engaged as its lobbyist the firm Brookline Advisory, whose partners included Lydia Ivanovsky, a former Chief of Staff to current Defence Minister Richard Marles, and Gerard Richardson, a former senior advisor to current Treasurer Jim Chalmers? Was the decision to make the investment influenced by the fact that Minister Husick's senior advisor Ellen Broad has a close personal friendship with a senior Blackbird employee, Kate Glazebrook, and given that Blackbird is an existing advisor in PsiQuantum? Was the decision to make the investment influenced by the fact that a senior Blackbird executive, Kate Glazebrook, was appointed to advisory boards by Minister Husick, and Blackbird is an existing advisor in PsiQuantum? Curiously, in response to my letter, Minister Husick has made the public statement that he welcomes further scrutiny and he welcomes a review being conducted by the ANIAO. His words were, quotes, "bring it on." Well, on this point, I do agree with Minister Husick. Let's bring it on. The fact is that taxpayers deserve and are entitled to a root and branch review of this deal to ensure that it meets the relevant standards. The fact is that Labor has made a big and risky bet with taxpayers' money. The evidence suggests that we have a minister who has arrived at a personal decision, having met PsiQuantum, having had a number of direct one-on-one meetings with PsiQuantum senior executives, having visited PsiQuantum at its facilities in Silicon Valley in January 2023. All the evidence suggests that as a consequence of this sequence of events occurring, the minister has arrived at a personal view that it would be an excellent idea for the Australian government, jointly with the Queensland government, to invest almost $1 billion of taxpayers' money into this company. Taxpayers deserve to know whether this is in fact what happened, and they also deserve to know why it is that the normal safeguards and processes which apply to funding of this kind and certainly of this scale do not appear to have been followed. Taxpayers deserve to know why it is that a senior official, indeed the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Industry, subsequently left the Department of Industry, was on leave of various kinds for 12 months, and then turned up in another department at First Assistant Secretary level. Is it true, as some have suggested, that this was a consequence of him providing advice that Minister Husic did not want to hear when he briefed against the advisability of this investment? The evidence points overwhelmingly to a captain's pick being made. This government has let its enthusiasm get ahead of its judgment and as a result exposed the Australian taxpayer to large and unnecessary risk. Australians deserve better, and I again call on the ANAO to conduct a full investigation.
The question is that grievances be noted, and I call the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, great news. Early childhood education workers are set to get a well-deserved 15% pay rise. For the typical early childhood worker, this means an extra $103 a week in their pay packet by the end of this year, increasing to an extra $155 per week in their pay packet by December 2025. And this also applies to out-of-school hours workers. This is fantastic news for these valuable workers, around 200,000 people across Australia, whom we entrust with the early education of our youngest Australians, and it's long overdue. We've spent decades, literally decades, talking about how the female-dominated professions such as early childhood education are underpaid, but doing nothing about it. We have spent decades talking about how valuable workers in early childhood education are, how they need to be skilled because the early childhood education for our children is really important and can set them up for life. And of course, these workers worked through the pandemic, demonstrating that they are vital frontline workers, not only for our children, but also to enable the necessary parts of the economy to keep going. And we want early childhood education to be a career of choice. We want people who are passionate about education for young children to see this as a viable long-term career. We want them to be able to earn a good living with a well-paid, secure job that they want to stay in. We want early childhood workers to keep investing in their own education and skills because they see a long and bright future doing what they do so well, educating young children. We don't want these valuable workers drifting into other sectors because they can get paid better. We don't want them drifting off into other sectors because they can't see a career in early childhood. This pay rise puts early childhood back on a par where it should be, a valued profession, a career of choice. And more workers in the early childcare sector means more early childcare places for children. This package helps strengthen the supply of qualified early childcare education and care workers in the sector. I speak to many early childhood centres in Boothby who tell me they have space for more children but not enough staff. Because, Deputy Speaker, there is a productivity angle to this as well. Early childhood education pay rise is not only good news for the workers themselves, it's good news for all of us, whether we have young children or not. Speaker, we also know that early childhood education is good for children. Children experiencing early extra years of high-quality early childhood education have additional opportunities to learn and develop. It helps children make friends and socialise generally. It helps them learn routines and self-regulation, and it helps them feel safe and secure. It helps them to learn independence and emotional resilience, and it helps with their transition to school. Children who've experienced high-quality early education exhibit less impulsivity and have more advanced expressive vocabulary and greater reported social competence. When I was campaigning prior to the 2022 election, I constantly heard from all sectors of the community about the shortage of workers. Businesses, large and small, from all sectors, told me how the previous government had neglected their vital need for skilled workers and how this was limiting their ability to grow or even exist. As a country, we need more workers, and parents choosing to return to work is the low-hanging fruit in terms of increasing the workforce. The ability for families to choose if it is right for them and their family for both parents to return to work means more workers, often skilled, experienced workers, and that's really important to our country and really important to our economy. And of course, for families wanting to consider both parents going back to work, the availability of good quality early childhood education is vitally important. An estimated 1.2 million families use early childhood education, plus all of those who use out-of-school hours care. Deputy Speaker, I take a whole-of-life view on this pay rise. I often speak of my experience working in women's homelessness, and the women we saw had often experienced a lifetime of gender disadvantage. They worked in female-dominated sectors, such as early childhood education. When they turned up in the homelessness sector, they had experienced a lifetime of lower wages, often insecure conditions, and they consequently had little savings and little superannuation. It's very hard to financially recover when you're 60 or 70 years of age. The Albanese Labor government has managed to get the gender pay gap down to 12%, the lowest ever in Australia. This 15% pay rise for early childcare workers or early childhood education workers will undoubtedly improve the gender pay gap even further, and it will change lives. This is good for workers, it's good for families, it's good for children, and it's good for our economy. Deputy Speaker, I met today with some of the early childhood workers who were here in Parliament, celebrating their win along with the United Workers Union. They should be congratulated for their campaign, literally over decades, to get a decent pay rate that appropriately values their skills, their commitment, and the importance of the work they do. And I'd like to take the time to thank the union, United Workers Union, and the workers. Their campaign has changed lives for over 200,000 workers across Australia, and of course we hope more will be joining them. This is the value of unions, it's the value of collective action. This hasn't been easy for them over this long period of time, and this is the importance of staying on message. So congratulations to them. This is life-changing for them, it's life-changing for families, but it also is life-changing for our country. Thank you.
The question is that grievances be noted, and I call the member for Lyne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to make some important comments about the brewing and distilling industry in Australia, which has hitherto been a flourishing part of cultural life in regional Australia in particular. There are over 600 distilleries and breweries around the country, and many of them are in the Lyne electorate. And before I go on, I'll just give a big shout out to our famous local breweries and distillers from Port Macquarie down through the Lyne electorate. We have Pacific Brewing in Foster-Tuncurry. The Pacific Brewing Company has a very established range. More Beer, Black Duck breweries in Port Macquarie. We have got the Tin Shed Brewery in Dungog. We have got the Farmer's Daughter Distillery in Allworth. And in Foster, we have a separate and brand new Wharf Street Distillery. They are all locally grown and flourishing distillers and brewers who supply into the local market. But they are under pressure, like everyone in this industry, because of the effects of inflation. When you think about it, a brewery and a distillery on a small scale or a large scale is subject to all the vagaries of every other manufacturing process. They're heavily dependent on expensive kit. They've got property they've got to provide to have a brewery or a distillery. The actual setup is huge capital cost. All the ingredients, the distilled water, the hops, and other grains involved, and the biologicals. And for those making other spirits, the raw alcohol. Barley and hops has gone up in price, aluminium cans, massive electricity rises, and last but not least, and most significant, excise. It goes up twice a year, according to CPI. And through the current situation we have in this country of high inflation, this is really starting to squeeze a lot of businesses to the wall. Huge amounts of increase in excise over the last 3 years with the high inflation rate. In 2023, the increase was 11% for beer, just in 1 year. 12% in 2 years, 16% in 3 years. Just in February this year, 1.8%, 2% in August a few days ago. Now, the cost of beer is not elastic. You can't keep charging more and more for beer. It's like milk. For Australians, beer is part of the cultural heritage. In moderation, it's great, but it's part of Australian culture. And we have found out in the tobacco excise and taxation that if you really start taxing too much, you end up with an illicit trade. And that's what's happened. Receipts for taxes on nicotine has been cut significantly because of chop, illegal tobacco that's being brought in along with vapes and other things like that. But I think the government should realise we are now the third highest taxing country in the world for beer and spirits. And we won't have a vibrant industry if we send all, particularly small boutique breweries, to the wall. We already have one in Port Macquarie that I didn't mention because they're no longer trading. They used to be called the Little Brewing Company, and then the eventual death knell of that was the closure because they couldn't get staff. And why they couldn't get staff was because all their staff had gone off and started working in the NDIS, because the payment in the NDIS is above most skilled and semi-skilled and trade certified workers in many other industries. Our budgetary income for beer and spirits was meant to be $2.65 billion, but the last budget downgraded it already. So we are at a tipping point where more breweries and distillers in country areas will close. There was prominent cases of them closing reported in the Fin Review, but they were they were more than just a small brewing company, but they have come unstuck because of their tax obligations. It's a really complex industry to do well. You only survive if you're well. They had great product, but as I mentioned, too much taxation will kill industry. We all want alcohol in moderation. I'm not advocating for no excise. I'm just saying give them a breather. There is a very important rebate for these small brewers so they can compete with the big international brewers who are dominating the Australian market now. And that is they have a remission scheme for the excise. If they're a small-scale brewer, they pay the excise like everyone does, but the first 350 they get rebated. And that's why we have a flourishing small brewery and distillery industry in Australia, rather than just all the big international firms. But that isn't indexed. So with all those 2 and 3 and 5 and 6% increases twice a year, things are tipping. And I don't want to see these thriving bits of cultural life. It goes with dining, tourism, and my electorate is full of tourism. It's a coastal electorate. All those areas are big businesses in a local sense, and it would be a tragedy if they were to suffer. So I'll put this marker in the ground now. I'll be calling on the Treasurer and the Finance Minister in the next budget to announce a freeze on the excise so that we can keep our local brewers, we can keep our local distilleries. You know, we've been in the wine industry through restraint of trade through tariffs, and we've seen if the tax, whether it's a tax from the country you're trying to sell it into or your own country is putting on things that will cruel our industry. We really need to look at it because we will be in the same situation as the taxation that we raise on tobacco, where it'll go underground, there will be illegal distilleries and jobs will be lost. So I commend this issue to others in the building. I'm sure you've all got some brewers and some distilleries in your own electorates, but they are big employers, and the value of small breweries and distilleries is that there's not some distant, faraway shareholder that's taking the profits out of the business. All the people working in it live local. All the money circulates into the local economy, and it's much better to have these little breweries rather than just large, huge international breweries off in faraway capital cities where you can still get a beer and you can still buy a gin and tonic, but it's not the same because you're not helping your local economy. So I commend this issue for many on both sides to take the time to educate the financial ministers in Finance and Treasury that they are about to kill the goose that laid the golden egg, so to speak. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The question is that grievances be noted, and I call the member for Swan.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I stand here tonight, as I do every day, as a proud West Australian, someone who will stand up for WA. I get WA, I understand the WA regions, and I understand my electorate. I make it a point to listen to my community, and every day I'm working hard to create a better future for everyone in my great state. So when the Leader of the Opposition talks about WA and the big decisions we need to secure our future, I'd like to take the opportunity to respond. You might remember what the Opposition Leader had to say about Labor's critical mineral investment program. It's a bit confusing because he says one thing on the East Coast and another on the West Coast. On the East Coast, he calls it tax cuts for billionaires, but over in WA, what does he say? It's the same old line that he pulls out when he doesn't know what to say. We'll have more to say about this. I see this as being a tricky opposition leader. When will he come clean? Just a few weeks ago, he was slamming Labor's plan to build a better future made in Australia, calling it tax cuts for billionaires. He and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition said that they would oppose it. So are they prepared to support the resource sector, a really important one in Western Australia, or some more of the old criticism? What he doesn't get is that Western Australians believe in a future made in Australia. We are the engine room for the country. We are the powerhouse, and we want to build more right here in WA. The pathway to net zero emissions runs through the plains of Western Australia, and the pathway for Australia to achieve net zero emissions runs through WA, not just for the country, but for the world. But unfortunately, the Leader of the Opposition doesn't understand that. He doesn't grasp how important the resource sector is to WA, or that it is the backbone of livelihoods across our state. And frankly, I don't think he wants to understand. I was born in the goldfields, born and bred with deep roots, and born in Kalgoorlie, grew up in a nickel mining town called Kambalda. My family made their home there, and I will always forever feel connected to regional WA. But I'll also say that you don't need to be from WA to understand WA. Premier Mark McGowan was born in New South Wales, a Welshman, and he understood West Australians. And what I'd say he did was he would listen and he would act. And I note that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is another New South Wales Welshman, and again, he is a leader who listens and acts, unlike the Leader of the Opposition who pays lip service to the communities of WA. Let's not kid ourselves. This isn't the first time he's flipped on key policies when things got tough. Remember when he was against the tax cuts? He was against the tax cuts, against giving every taxpayer, that's 3.6 million Australians, a tax cut on the 1st of July. But now he's not opposed to it. And then there's nuclear energy. Last year, he said that he was against large-scale nuclear energy, but now he's for it, even though he hasn't figured out the cost for it. No clue what it will cost Australians. The Liberal leader won't tell us how much it will cost to build these nuclear reactors, how much more expensive nuclear power will make our bills, or how many reactors will pop up in communities across Australia. He mentioned that there would be one in Collie in the southwest of Western Australia. But did he choose to face the people of Collie in his recent visit to WA? How weak and cowardly. Is it that he couldn't be bothered, or wasn't interested, or didn't care? He won't tell the Australians the true cost of his nuclear plan, so let me spell it out. The Smart Energy Council says that building 7 nuclear reactors would cost taxpayers up to $600 billion, while only securing a measly 3.7% of Australia's energy mix by 2050. That's $600 billion. Nuclear energy is the most expensive form of energy, meaning that Australians will pay up to 8 times for their electricity bill. My last electricity bill, my monthly bill, was $260. That's for a 3x1 on a battle axe block. So 8 times would be basically $2,000. Ain't nobody got dollar bills for that. This risks energy and economic security of the nation. CSIRO experts have pointed out that nuclear reactors wouldn't be up and running till at least 2040. Australia simply can't wait that long. Under the LNP, 24 coal plants announced that they were shutting down, and by 2035, 90% of Australia's coal power will be gone. So if the plan is to transition coal towns to nuclear towns, there will be this gap, at least a 5-year gap. And I don't know if you've lived in a town where industry gets ripped out and there's no jobs in the community. It's pretty soul-destroying and it's a really tough place to live. This is not the transition to the clean energy economy that we need. The Australian Energy Market Operator has made it clear we need to replace the energy capacity before it disappears. And the cheapest way to do that is through reliable renewables coupled with storage and firming energy, and that is the best solution to make this happen. By pausing the delivery of reliable renewables instead promising untested, uncosted, experimental nuclear reactors will cost Australia. The Coalition will put our future energy security at jeopardy. This is a reality, and I don't think that I want to go there, and I don't think that West Australians want to go there. Nuclear energy is too slow to keep the lights on, and too expensive to build, and too risky for Australia's energy needs. The Leader of the Opposition and the Coalition are hiding the details on how much taxes this would cost and how much bills would rise and for these 7 risky reactors. But what we know from this nonsensical plan is that in 2 decades, the Coalition's policy would be the most expensive energy there is. I was honestly astounded when I heard about this policy, and initially I thought that it was a joke. And the scary thing is that this is not a joke. This is not an episode of Utopia. This is the opposition's policy. And the thing that I'd say from a West Australian perspective is West Australians spotted a fake leader in the previous member for Cook, No comments on the current one. And what I'd say, they spotted a fake in the previous Prime Minister. They will identify this as fake energy policy, and this is something that they will see. And if we see that the next election is a referendum on nuclear energy, we will win that, and we will earn the vote and make sure that people understand what the truth is. So let's talk about what Labor is doing on energy. And so one of the first things that we did when we stepped into power was announce a 43% reduction on greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. We have an ambitious target of 82% renewable energy. Now, from an energy bill perspective, we are also cutting people's energy bills this financial year. If you live in Western Australia, you will get $700 off your electricity bill. Your July bill, you would have seen $350. In your December-January bill, another $350, and it's an example of the state and federal governments working together. Our renewable energy plan is the only one that's backed by experts to deliver clean, cheap, reliable and resilient energy for Australians. Under Labor, we have seen a 25% in renewables in the national grid, record investment in battery and storage, over 50 renewable projects greenlit, enough to power 3 million homes, and more than 330,000 rooftop solar installations last year alone. Power prices are a serious issue, and Australians deserve a plan to bring them down, and that's exactly what we're working on. In contrast to the Liberals' obsession with nuclear, which is risky and costly, and it is Australians who will end up paying for it. Their anti-renewable stance ignores the fact that renewables are the cheapest form of energy, and the more renewables we get into the system, the more prices will come down. The Albanese government's reliable renewable energy plan is the only one that is supported by experts to deliver clean, cheap, reliable and resilient energy systems that Australians deserve. The Albanese government is pumping big money into renewables to boost Australia's reliable energy capacity, create jobs and attract investment. This not only helps lower prices, but also cuts emissions. We're working hard to create a fairer, kinder, greener and better future for Australia. Thank you.
There being no further grievances, the debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made an order of the day for the next sitting. Call the member for Swan.
I move that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
Is the motion seconded?
I second the motion.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The Federation Chamber stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. on Wednesday, the 14th of August.
You're allowed to